Welcome to Coaching Uncaged by Animas, the podcast that explores the art, science, and career of coaching. And now, introducing your host and interviewer, Yannick Jacob.
Well, wonderful. Damian Goldvarg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great being here.
It's really good to meet you. We're meeting relatively fresh. I was just saying a little bit earlier, when Nick sent your name around, I was like, that name rings a bell, but I don't really know much about you. And then I noticed I do have one of your books on the shelf. And I got really curious about who you are. I've read some really interesting things very quickly. I've noticed you've done a lot. So you've published a number of books around the ICF competencies, around leadership development. You published around coaching supervision, particularly. I want to dig into that a little bit, particularly in the Americas, South America. So you've chaired the ICF Global Chapter 2013, 2014 it was. That must have been quite a trip. Mm-hmm. You've bring a ton of business experience. You have ontological roots. I saw you've trained at some point with the Newfield Network. So ontological existential has a lot of meeting points. So I was curious about that. Mm-hmm. You studied counseling initially, but then moved into business organizational development. And you've done a ton of work. And looking at your website, I mean, the amount of courses and trainings that you offer that all are live and active is very, very impressive. So you seem to be a beacon for coaching development, and people seem to be raving about the space that you create. So I'm really excited to talk to you. I wonder if there's anything that might be helpful for people to know about you, to kind of know where you're talking from.
Well, I am pretty passionate, as you can see, about coaching, because I do believe that coaching makes a difference in people's lives. Mm-hmm. So I do believe that coaching not only work on personal transformations, if not in creating systems that are more that are healthier. Mm-hmm. So with that perspective, I believe that my work is about working one-on-one with people so they can create better lives for themselves and affect their system that they're part of. And as a result of that, create better organizations, better systems, better society, and a better world. So it's a way to contribute to the world. So I believe that our work in transformation is a work of love for the world and for humankind. And it's our contribution in a way to make a difference. And I'm very passionate about it, to the extent, Yannick, that I got everybody in my family to go through coaching training.
Oh, really? So how did you manage that?
That was an interesting process. I started one by one. I started with my brother. I am the oldest of three boys, and I started with the middle one, who were very close friends. And he was the first one who went through coaching training. And then we together convinced our mother to do it. And she went through coaching training with my brother's wife together to get trained as coaches. And then after that, my youngest brother also was interested and go through training. And then my father was left out, and he didn't want to be left out in conversations. So he ended going through coaching training in his 70s.
Oh wow! Amazing.
So it's and then my brother's son went through coaching training with my program. He came to do my own training, having training coaches now for more than 10 years. Mm-hmm. And the book that you have in your hand, Norma Perel, who is one of the authors, is my mother.
Right.
She's also a master coach like me, and we wrote several of the books together.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's different. That's something different.
Yeah. I mean, that are all of your family now working as coaches? Because I'm a big proponent of the idea that coach training makes for better people. Exactly. There's a lot of coaches who don't actually coach after their coach training, but they're better communicators, better listeners. They're more aware of themselves. They reflect better. You know, it creates so much different just to go through the training. But it sounds like at least some of your family are also very active,
Yes.
formally coaching.
And I also got my partner to go through coaching training and all of my closest friends. So I think that there is only one who have not done it. But yeah, I think that my mother is a master coach, and then both of my parents eventually came to my first coaching supervision training ever. Like I went through the first coaching supervision training in the Americas in 2013 through Coaching Supervision Academy. And I was doing that because I was in the global board of directors and we were discussing about supervision and I didn't know about it. So I thought, okay, I need to learn about it so I can contribute from a better place. And I fell in love with supervision and I thought every coach should have a supervisor. And I got in trouble. Because because in Europe it's very well accepted, but not in the United States because it was considered that was for psychologists only. And Janik, if you work with people, you always need somebody to discuss what's happened to you because we all have reactions, emotions. So eventually I was asked to do the first program ever in Spanish in the world in coaching supervision in Spanish. So I went and I developed my own program. And that was in 2017, 4 years later, after I finished my program, I have an experienced supervisor. And my parents were in my first cohort, so they were my guinea pigs. So I asked my friends and family members to come through my coaching supervision training first ever, just because I was learning to do that. And they were part of my first cohort. And then since then, they have been supervisors, both of them. And they have been working in my program when I teach coaching supervision in Spanish. Now, both of my parents are psychologists. So I followed them to be a clinical psychologist. We all went through the same University of Buenos Aires. We got our degrees in psychology. There is a licensed psychologist. And so we were all clinical licensed psychologists in Argentina. So I followed
what
them,
a family.
I followed them, and then they followed me to become coaches and supervisors. And then my middle brother, he still works as a coach. And he has his emphasis is he also works as in communication topics. So he coaches leaders and executives around public speaking. And he wrote a book also that has been published about that.
Wow. Everybody just take a moment to imagine their parents in their training.
Most of the time, we get along really well. So most of the time was not problematic. But
yeah, I guess there's different relationships that people have with their parents. I think my mom would be amazing. My dad would be more challenging to have sit in there. But hey, you come from a family of psychologists. You said you got trained up as a clinical psychologist. How does one make the transition from clinical psychology, ontological coaching, I think might have come later, but you did a PhD in organizational development, if I read that correctly. So how come the shift from clinical psychology to organizational spaces?
I always like groups and working with groups and organizations, but at that time, we're talking about 35 years ago, you didn't have that choice. So they were not in Argentina where I was living. It was only psychology. There were not any specializations at that time. So I studied psychology. That was what was available. Now there are a lot of options, but not at that time. So then when I moved to the United States, first I went back and I got a license as a marriage and family therapist. So I got a master's in counseling. So when I got my master's in counseling, that allowed me to do it. And I did a lot of HIV and AIDS work. At that time. So that also influenced my work in the future, because when you're working with people living with HIV and AIDS, life and death issues, it really makes you grow fast. And I was young. I was only like 25 years old, I think, at that time. And I really gave me a lot of maturity, I think, and also in some way impacted all my work. You know, you work with existential coaching. I would love to hear more about it, but that work was about how you live your life, what is important. And so I think that still influenced my work. There is like a sense of urgency that life is short. You don't know how long do you have, so you want to really contribute, make a difference, live in the moment, enjoy the moment to them. So it's that's the reason why you may see people say, you do so many things, how do you keep track of everything? And I think it's part of that sense of urgency. It's like, okay, things need to be done, so let make that happen.
Yeah, I think when we spend so much time in this kind of close proximity with death, I mean, existentialists love talking about death traditionally, but really what we're talking about is endings, and it doesn't have to be like the ultimate ending, or who knows what comes after death, if anything. But it's a significant change or end, probably the most significant that we know as human beings. And if we spend so much time holding space for people who really have to think about endings. I mean, endings are everywhere. People lose their jobs, people lose loved ones, people get in and out of relationships or in and out of jobs. I mean, people who get married face a significant ending and also a significant beginning. Every significant beginning is also a significant ending. So I appreciate that you went through quite a school, spending so much time with people considering endings.
And we're talking very different now. That was in 92, 30 years ago when I was doing this work. So right now, people live with medications, but at that time I was running support groups. So my job was I was a leader of a program with support groups, and there were like 20 support groups, and my job was to facilitate some of them and to train and supervise the facilitators. And sometimes I was running a group, and a few months later, everybody will be dead. So it was very
wow.
And then I worked in the family program with family and children living with HIV and AIDS. So that was also tough, working with a family where several family members will be HIV positive.
Yeah.
But that was a little bit later. So that was in the late 90s. So there were already some medication. So it was not the same like at the beginning of the 90s.
Yeah.
But I do believe that job really helped me to look at priorities. I think for me, so what's really important.
Yeah.
What's really important? That's the question. And I like to ask this question to my clients. What's really important here? What's really important? And sometimes in our lives, we believe that we are clear about what is important, but then our decisions are not based on what is really important.
Yeah.
So I think that I do believe coaching offers an opportunity for people to reflect on what's really important for you, what's really important in your life, and based on that, what decisions are you making? Because sometimes people may be more or less intentional about the decision that they make, about how they live their lives.
Yeah.
And sometimes they realize that they have made a mistake when it's a little bit late. I say, should I have done this or the other?
Yeah. How do you, sorry to jump in, but like, how do you make that a visceral experience? I mean, if you do, because often when we ask that question, people can take this as a more intellectual exercise of, well, yeah, meaning, purpose, what's my why? Yeah, I've done a workshop, or, this is important to me. But you've had a lived experience of, being so close to people dying that you have an experience of, well, I better make the most of my time because you don't know. So in your coaching, when you ask that question, what do you do, if anything, to make this a lived experience, to make this visceral, to make this more meaningful question and not an intellectual exercise?
Well, Jenny, it all depends on the client. We can do what we can do, and the clients can do what they can do. So you can bring the questions, and people are at a different level of their development. And so for some people, it will go, they will not get it. They will not go there. So it's up to them to take it and make it work, because it's their life. I believe that we as coaches can be catalysts for change and transformation, but it's up to the person to be able to, sometimes it's being willing, and sometimes being able to do the work that they need to do. So we can support them. Like I train coaches, I train mentor coaches, I train coach supervisors, I train team coaches. And so it's most people who can do any work around coaching. And I always tell them that we are always co-pilots. We are always co-pilots. The person who is driving is our client, and the client is the one who decides where to go, and how to get there, and we are the co-pilots. We can provide some guidance, we can be there to support them, but at the end of the day, it's their life. They are driving their car, their life, and we are there to support them as much as they allow us to do that. So I bring my passion, I think, or my energy, and then people take it or not. So, and I think it's about commitment, how committed you are. Like, I am very committed to my work and my client, but not all clients are committed to their own lives.
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes I listen recordings. I am also an assessor for ICF. I listen recordings and for people who apply for the EMCC, the Master Certified Coach Accreditation. And sometimes you hear that this coach is more committed to the client result than the client. So that sometimes happens.
Yeah, I have that in supervision fairly regularly, that the coach works much harder than the client. And I found that it's much more likely when coaches are at the beginning of their journey. They tend to be very committed, working very hard, and it's not really helpful. But you're saying that's similar at MCC level as well, that there's coaches who are working harder than their clients.
Yeah, well, they are choosing the wrong recording to send. So they are not sending the, sometimes they don't, sometimes I evaluate recordings, sometimes recordings are great, sometimes they are not. And when they are not, maybe different factors that make them not to be so effective.
Yeah.
But yeah, the coach, I don't think it should be working harder than the client, no matter at what level you are.
Yeah, I would agree. I was just thinking about the assessment process because MCC is quite the level. You know, it's really, really rigorous. I was quite impressed hearing some stories of people like it's a tough one, you know, and it takes some time and it takes a lot of commitment. But in the end, you pick one recording. And I see a lot of people with like accreditation who actually don't quite coach like that. They just pick the right recording to get the accreditation. So I wonder, given that you're so close to the ICF, spend so much time in there, still working a lot for them and within the competency framework, a lot of your publications have been around the competencies. A lot of the training I saw is guided by the competencies. So I wonder what you think about that process. And like, I guess the gripe I have with it, or one of them, is that people can jump through the hoops and then they coach however they want anyway. I wonder if you see that a lot, or whether anything can be done about it.
Well, I think you're right. I agree with you. And the intention of the assessment is that people can show that they can do it. That they can really, there are some guidelines of what assessors expect from a session, that the coach is present, is trust himself, and is confident in the way that present him or herself, that is embrace silence, that go deeper, don't stay at a superficial level. So there are some things we are looking as assessors. But coaches, sometimes they do that, sometimes they don't do it. They can do it for one recording, and the expectation is that they can show that they can at least do it once. We don't know how many times they coach that way, but we assess the recording we are listening. So if in that recording, and in evaluations in all coaching schools, in all coaching programs, it is expected that coaches demonstrate performance and skills based on different requirement for ACC, PCC, MCC, the 3 credentials. The requirements and the expectations are different, because it's supposed to, you have less experience, so you're supposed to demonstrate less skills. What the whole paradigm, I don't agree completely, because I train people who are amazing since the beginning, and I have people who have a lot of experience who are not. So having a lot of years of experience doesn't make you necessarily more effective at going deeper, not giving advice, not telling people what to do, you know, some of the things we are looking for. But that's the idea. So that expectation is that people can demonstrate at least. Now, the other piece that is a misunderstanding is that different clients need different things. Not all competencies and all of the behavior that are expected from a coach are appropriate for each client. So the idea is we need to understand what the client needs, so we adapt the competency model to the client. not the client to a competency model. We cannot force the model that we have because we need to demonstrate competency. I think we need to work with the client at where the client is. And if the client needs advice and needs guidance and they want to hire us to do that, if you can provide that, great. Not coaching. According to the ICF, it's not coaching. Other people may say, yeah, that's coaching. I would say, no, according to the ICF, this is not coaching, consulting. You're bringing your expertise. Like I have a Ph.D. in organizational psychology. So basically, if to finish the story, I went from my master's in counseling to my Ph.D. in organizational psychology because I always love groups and organizations and teaching and training. I think that my passion is that. So when I started working in training and working as a leader, I have a lot to say. I have been training leaders for 30 years, so I have a lot to say. But when I'm coaching, it's not my time to do that. When I'm coaching. I am doing something that is much more difficult than teaching and giving information. It's making people think. So it's much easier to share your wisdom or your experience than to work with somebody so the person can come up with their own solution, look inside, look at themselves, look at their own resources, think about things. That's much more required, much more skill.
Yeah.
But I don't see a problem with coaches consulting, but they need to let know the client that they are consulting, not coaching. Can you hear the difference? So I don't see a problem, but you just need to be clear what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Clients tend to not really care whether you're coaching or consulting. They just want to have their problem solved, right? So I hear that from a lot of coaches, and it can be tempting when you have expertise to put that on the table. But even if they do it in a proper way and say, well, if I take my coaching hat off for a moment, there's something I can offer or put on the table, see what you think. My experience is that once you open that door, clients want more and more and more of that, because then you're doing the work for them. How can coaches navigate that sort of thing?
Well, I do believe that it's all about contracting. So are you a supervisor too? Do you do some supervision? So as a supervisor, we know that many times coaches bring issues to supervision. And when you start exploring, sooner or later, you get to contracting. Not always,
but in my experience, almost every session. What did you agree?
Yeah. So this is about contracting, how the coach contracts with the client, and how and it's interesting because when coaches are new and they're getting trained as coaches and they don't know exactly what coaching is yet or how to explain it, they have more trouble later. So that's the reason why if they are clear at the beginning and explain what is coaching and how it works and what is expected, if they have a strong contract, it's much easier to navigate it than when that's not in place. So I do believe that the secret is contracting, and recontracting.
Yeah, like Peter Hawkins says, the ABC of coaching, always be contracting.
Exactly.
The challenge I hear about in supervision a lot is that the coach contracts, but it's more like one of my assessors, and when I ran the master's at the University of East London, was saying, I've seen a lot of these coaching videos now for the assessment, and it feels more like the coach is reading the client their rights rather than having a conversation, agreeing what the space is and co-creating it. So I think a lot of contracting takes place by coaches just by, well, this is what coaching is. And then the client says, yes. Okay. But do they really get it? So I wonder if you have some tips for coaches out there about how we can make the contracting conversation most effective.
And Janik, that happens all the time. So what I tell the coach that I am training, I ask them, ask your client to tell you what they understood. Ask the client to read in advance the written contracts, and when you get together, ask the client what is their understanding of what is coaching and what they're going to be doing together, so they can articulate that and check to be sure that there is understanding. So I do believe that that is one of the ways. The other piece also is about preparation. I believe that when you prepare for coaching and when you prepare for supervision, you are better. You can take advantage of the time better. So like if you have think in advance, okay, this is what I want to work on. This is what I would like to see different. So I invite and I insist for coaches and supervisors to ask their clients to come prepared to the sessions, so they can take better advantage. So it's easier to navigate some of these challenges by doing that.
Yeah, great.
Not all clients do it, but it's a good best practice, I think.
Yeah, that's great tips. I want to, for a moment, go back to the competency framework. I know whenever I got closer or spent a lot of time in proximity to the competency frameworks for whatever reason, they tended to be very alive for me. I wonder, after all these years, do you still catch yourself being in a session and having like an inner assessor sitting on your shoulder and thinking like, oh, but that wasn't a super clean question, or like that was maybe somewhat leading, or do you still have that kind of part in you? No.
I realized when I changed to consulting, I do realize that I'm changing to consulting, and I would say, okay, I want to share. You're asking me, I will share with you best practices, but I am aware of that piece. But the rest, no, I don't think that way any longer. And the most I think that we use them, like, I consider myself an expert. I wrote books about competencies. But interestingly, what I tell people is the more that I know them, the more detached I feel from them. It's like the more you use it as a framework, I think the more I'm letting them go. Because when you are in front of a human being, you don't want to be doing that. You are in front of a human being, you want to be 100% with a person. So if you bring the competencies, you lose that presence. So the job is just to let that go, and also be compassionate with ourselves. We are not perfect. Sometimes, Yannick, we may not be asking the best question, or we may not be present. We're human beings too. So it happened to us. Like, I have been a master coach for more than 10 years, but I am not a master coach in every session. I am committed to do my best. And what is interesting over the years, also I learned, if anything happens, if I am too tired, or if I don't feel right, I don't feel guilty any longer canceling sessions. That's something that I learned over time. That for years, like if I had to, I would not cancel a session for anything. It would be very difficult for me to cancel a session. And now, I don't know, maybe because I am older, but or wiser. But if I am not in a right place, if I feel distracted, if I feel tired, if I didn't sleep well at night, if I am not in the right place to do my best, I cancel the sessions. Don't do it very often, but I remember when I got COVID, I didn't have any problem canceling everything. Like when I got COVID, I was scared because I was at the beginning of COVID, when there was nothing, there were not vaccination, people were dying, nowhere to go because the hospitals were all full. Fortunately, was not very. I didn't get very sick. But the whole experience was a little bit scary because we didn't have a lot of information at the beginning of the pandemic. But I really took care of myself. So I think that coaches have issues with that. Taking care of themselves is an issue. And that happens in other professions too, like in psychology, social worker, like people who work with people, many times they are not as caring of themselves, taking care of themselves.
Yeah, and I think this is where supervision has been very alive in this conversation, sometimes in the background, sometimes very much, but there's so many linking points, and this taking care of yourself is really something that's so important because it's an important function. It's one of the 3 functions of supervision, right? Normative, formative, restorative. And the restorative function of supervision, I think people underestimate it. Supervision has this view that, I'm going to discuss challenging clients and how to move forward with them. And it's just so much more than that. I mean, sometimes I just hold space for an hour for someone to just, make sense of something, just be okay. Like, you mentioned working with people who are like facing significant endings. And that happens in coaching all the time. People go through really difficult situations. And the line between coaching and therapy has become more and more blurry. As coaches go deeper with their clients, they hold more space. The awareness about mental health is much more significant now. Trauma-informed coaching is on the map. People coach recovering addicts and offer coaching support. So, I mean, you hear so many stories that are heartbreaking.
And I have a problem with that. Like today I was talking to a colleague of mine and she was telling me about his colleague that is doing recovery coaching and that he's a specialty. And I don't know. I don't think that that's right. I think that even therapists who have, like in our case locally in California, people need to get 3,000 hours of experience before getting a credential, a license as a marriage and family therapist, or as a psychologist, or as a social worker. These are the kind of works where you work with people through these kind of issues. And you need 3,000 hours of experience and, master level, PhD level education. And even with that education, that doesn't make you necessarily an expert in dealing with trauma or addictions. You still need training over that. And it scares me that people going through a 6 weeks or 8 weeks trauma-informed coaching feel that they can work with trauma. They can't. So that's a problem. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And it's scary.
Yeah, I felt very much the same way. I then had quite a lot of conversations with coaches who work in that space, because part of why I was drawn to existential coaching was that it felt more integrative. It felt like I could go deeper with clients. By the nature of the existential questions, there would be a space that we touch on that, was more traditionally seen as a therapeutic space. So in the beginning, first time I heard somebody working with bereavement, for example, I'm like, don't do it. And I remember I wrote a nugget about it to my email list and having a bit of a rant about how coaches really shouldn't be working with bereavement. And then a few of them reached out who had that niche. And I had some really, really good conversations in the trauma-informed space as well. I think it's a big problem, 100% agree with you, when coaches want to work to resolve the trauma or the traumatic experience or the addiction. I think that's hugely problematic. What I think is possible, and where coaches can and are really doing some excellent work, is work coaching someone despite some trauma being present. And it's not the kind of paralyzing childhood experience that lets you not form positive thoughts or get petrified in certain situations. And you want to help somebody move forward with that. But depending on your definition of trauma is everywhere. Like, the majority of people had traumatic experience in the past. If we wouldn't coach anybody who's had an experience with something traumatic, then we probably wouldn't be coaching at all. Similar with addiction, right? If we want to zoom into the root cause of the addiction, I think it's very problematic. But if we can use coaching as a space for someone who's a recovering addict to just, make sense of some things, move forward, build some new habits, success, navigate their career, despite the still struggling with addiction or the remnants of it. So I do think there's a place for coaching now, but I do agree that we need to be very carefully where we tread and how we tread there.
I think it is different, like you said, trauma-informed coaching, where the coach has learned through a program some basic information about trauma, so they better understand the client who went through trauma, but not to work through the trauma and solve the trauma. So these are two different things.
Very.
The same thing about bereavement. I think bereavement is something that we all go through sooner or later. Now, there is some bereavement that is a normal bereavement. Somebody died, you have grief, you may be able to work with somebody, some of the issues, but you may have unfinished business with a person. And if you have unfinished business and you're having complete conversations, this kind of coaching can be superficial. You will need to work deeper with a therapist. So there is a place for different things in different formats. So I don't think we should generalize, like nobody should do it, or I think each situation is unique. And I do believe at the end of the day, Yannick, I do believe that coaches need to know their boundaries. Coaches need to know when whatever the client is bringing is part of what they're trained to do, and when it's not. And when it's not, they need to refer. I think that this is the summary, I would say, of the conversation.
Oh, yeah. And you mentioned two words that I like very, very much earlier. You mentioned willing and able, right? And I think these are two very, very important words when coaches ask themselves, how far can I go and can I work with this client? Should I take on this client? Do I need to refer this client? Are you willing to work with this person? Because you might have the skills, but you just don't want to. And are you able? And there are they can be very tricky question. Maybe the ability is more of a tricky question than the willingness.
What is the boundary? What is the boundary? Well, and I think here is the issue that I think coaches should be paying attention to. When they have new client, what is the boundary? What is appropriate and what is not for coaching? Most of the time, when coaches have a question and they are not sure, because probably not. They won't have a question. So most of the time, not every time, but most of the time, when coaches are wondering, is it really for coaching? Because probably not. So that's the reason why supervision is a perfect place to bring this to discussion and to figure out. Or intuitively, coaches may know, I don't think that this person is ready. Now, when I was talking about able and willing, I was not talking about the coach, I was talking about the client. But can apply also to the coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, supervision is such an important space for that, because someone might not have that thought in their head, that doubt whether they should or shouldn't be working with this client, but maybe they feel it somewhere, and maybe they just don't really pay attention to that. And then also you might pay attention to a feeling that you get of doubting whether this is the right thing, but maybe that's not your feeling. Maybe that's a feeling that somebody else instilled in you, parents, coaching schools, previous supervisors, etc.
Yeah, definitely. That's the reason why supervision is so important, to have a space to reflect on all of this.
Yeah. So tell me a bit more about supervision. I mean, you wrote a whole book around supervision, voices from the Americas. I wonder how supervision, and also I'm curious about how coaching is perceived there, because I've met another fellow existential coach in Mexico who told me about how coaching is viewed in Mexico, and it was quite concerning. I was like, wow, I might need to be careful with what I'm calling myself when I meet people here. So I wonder what's the state of coaching and supervision in the Americas?
Well, I'm originally from Argentina, and I do a lot of work in Latin America. I wrote 8 books, 6 in Spanish, and two in English. The one that you were talking about, supervision in the Americas, is in English, and I also wrote a book on supervision in Spanish. There are not too many coaching supervision books in Spanish available in the market now. So what I can say, let me tell you about supervision, about coaching first. You were talking about ontological coaching. Ontological coaching is how coaching started developing in Latin America through the ontological schools. Basically, the first coaching schools were ontological schools. So many of the people who were trained as coaches, particularly in South America, came from that background.
Why? Sorry to jump in, but why is that?
Like Newfield Network, Julio Laya, Rafael Echeverría, who studied with Fernando Flores. You may have heard about Fernando Flores. So they are the ones who move, and through coaching training start developing the coaches in Latin America.
So why ontological? Is it because these guys were ontological and they started the training, or is there something culturally that is drawn more to that kind of philosophy?
I think both. I think because it has an existential perspective too. I think part maybe cultural. And part is because it was available. It came to the market. It's and in the United States, Newfield with Julio Laya, where I went through coaching training myself, I had that same philosophy, but it's not very well developed compared to other modalities of coaching in the rest of the world.
Could you frame it briefly, just for people who might have not heard the term ontological before?
Yes, ontological coaching is based on work originally done by Fernando Flores, and it relates to working with language, working with the body, and working with emotions. So the ontology is about the study of the being, and it's related to existentialism. It's about the being, how we're showing up, who we're being in our lives, and how we choose, how we're being, and how aware or not are we about how we do what we do. So basically, in ontological coaching, we explore how we're showing up in our lives. And how we're showing up, it means who you are being as a teacher, who you're being as a father, who you're being as a partner, who you're being as a father, who are you in your life? And then look at the gap between who you are and who you want to be. But most of the time, there is a gap in terms of what is in our mind about who we want to be and how we want to show up and what we do. So we look about this distance in the being, and we do that through the language. So we pay attention to language and the words and the meaning of the words and how we create our reality with language. And we ask a lot of questions about language, and we are very curious, and we don't give for granted. Like if we are talking about supervision, maybe for you joining supervision is different what supervision for me. So we need to explore language. So we do a lot of work with language, with emotions, explore emotions, and with the body, what's happening in our body as a sort of information. So basically the ontological coaching work with language, body, emotions, and explore them to support the clients to look at who they are being and what is the gap, who want to. It's one way to define it. Other people will define it in another way. That's my own personal definition. So I own this definition. I don't think that will be the one that maybe one of my teachers will provide.
Great. Okay, so there's those kind of roots in Latin America, partly because it was available, partly because culturally people feel drawn to maybe being more present, working more with emotions and language. And
the Association of Coaches in Argentina, Association of Coaches. The other association, like we have ICF, it's a global organization. And I know in Germany, you have several coaching associations, don't you? In Argentina, we have three, I think. One is the International Coach Federation. The other is the Association of Coaches in Argentina. And that's an ontological coaching association. So all of the people who participate and are part of the association and the accredited schools who are ontological, if they are not ontological, they cannot be part of it.
Wow.
And they also have a requirement that it has to be 2 years, interestingly. So they have high standards. It has to be 2 years, less than 2 years. If not, they cannot be part of the organization, basically. So it's interesting. And about supervision is relatively new. Like when I went through my first program to share with you in 2013, in 2016, 3 years later, I started the first program in Spanish. And then that follow up with the first one in English. And now we are in cohort 20. Wow. So we have been training since then, the last 8 years, around 20 cohorts, around between 12 and 15 people in each class. So, and let's say that we have around 300 people, 200 from English speakers worldwide, and the other 100 from Latin America and Spain. Or in the United States who speak Spanish. And we are having our first conference in Spanish, the first coaching supervision conference in Spanish ever, coming up in mid-April.
Oh, great.
And then a few years ago, I went to the ICF and I said, we need to create a community of practice for supervisors. And they say, it's not a priority strategy for us. So
what did they say?
It's not a strategic priority. It's not a strategic priority for us. So with a colleague of mine who was thinking about doing something in the Americas, with Lily Ciro from Canada, we decided and we started developing the Americas Coaching Supervision Network. And the Americas Coaching Supervision Network has as a goal to bring visibility to coaching supervision in the Americas. And we started that 6 years ago. And every year we're having a conference. And this is our 6th conference coming up. The 6th annual Coaching Supervision Conference in the Americas.
Amazing.
Where we have around, we have in the network 300 participants. And I would say that 200 are from the Americas and the other 100 from everywhere else, because we invite everybody who can join. So not only from America, we have supervisors from all over the world who are also part of our network. And so we are, and with that network, we offer, okay, let's do a book together. And we invite everybody to participate in the book. And as a result of that, we got that book that you were talking before that came up last year, Coaching Supervision, Voices from the Americas, where the first coaching supervisors in the Americas share their experiences, working with groups, working inside organizations. And it's very, very interesting book.
Oh, great. Yeah, I mean, Animas, who produces this podcast, we also run a supervision school where I'm also teaching. So it's a global supervision school, International Center for Coaching Supervision. It's so great to have people from all over the world spreading supervision. I see a real energy around it. It wasn't always like that. I mean, I'm still flabbergasted that for MCC, I don't think it's still a requirement to have supervision. I mean, it's strongly recommended as far as I understand it.
For the EMCC, mandatory. For ACF, if not. So
right.
EMCC and AC, that are the two biggest associations in Europe, for them, they make it mandatory for their members to get supervision to renew their accreditation. So, and I think that this is what should be done. This is what I tried to do for ACF, but I was not successful. I think it's taking time, but I think eventually we're going in that direction. I think that's in a couple of years. Because if we need to look at quality, we need to look at development. And I do believe that as coaches need to work on themselves. So they're working with a client. They're working in the client development. They need to work in their own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's strange concept to not do that quite naturally. And I think it can work bottom up. It doesn't need to be the professional bodies who mandate this. I would love every coach to make that decision that this is the right thing for them. So I just wanted to give you a space where, I mean, you feel very passionate about this clearly. What would you tell a coach who's listening to this or watching this, who are not in supervision for whatever reason? Give us your best speech about why everybody should be working with a supervisor.
Well, I think that we don't know what we don't know. So that may be a blind spot for many coaches. They don't understand what is coaching supervision and how it works. So if you don't have coaching supervision, my recommendation or suggestion is that you try it and see how it works. So have 1 session, 2 sessions, experience with, because it's like coaching. Sometimes it's difficult to explain what is coaching until you experience it. So this is what many coaches do. They offer a free session for people to understand what is and how it works. And then the client decides if it is for me or not. I think supervision should be the same. Like, we should try it. Like when I went to get trained, I have not had formal supervision in this format in the past. I had supervision as a therapist, but not as a coach. It is different. It is different. So as I said, we don't know what we don't know. And I do believe that coaching supervision is an opportunity to reflect on our work, going to the next level. It doesn't matter where we are. Like I am a master coach and I still work with a supervisor. Doesn't matter how much experience we have. We have blind spots. So supervision is a space to look at what we may not be seeing, to explore ethical dilemmas. We were talking before about the other function, Yannick, about resourcing ourselves, deal with our emotions, look at how to take care of ourselves, no matter where we are, no matter how much experience we have. I do believe that supervision provides a space for the coach to support the work we are doing. And I am a proponent also of starting with coaching supervision during coaching training. I think that most time people think about coaching supervision after people are trained. But in my coaching training and some of my colleagues' coaching programs, we started incorporating supervision in the coaching training. So coaches know what is supervision and how it works before they finish, so they know that they have to work with a supervisor. And I tell people, I will not refer you a client if you're not working with a supervisor. I will not trust you as a coach if you don't work with a supervisor. Doesn't matter how much experience you have.
And there's so many different supervisors. I mean, if you say, well, just go to a coach, check it out, see if you like it, and somebody goes to see one coach and has a session, who knows what that person is going to do? And I think in supervision, there's not many guidelines. I mean, even the accepted supervisors for AC, EMCC, it's a pretty broad range. Somebody doesn't need to have formal training in order to be a supervisor. So I find that some supervisors, they're just coaching the coach. Some supervisors, they're mentoring or consulting or guiding from a position of knowing and experience. And some supervisors, they're strictly facilitative, right? They hold space for someone to really reflect. So there's so many different styles. I think just going to a supervisor and see how that feels like doesn't necessarily tell you anything, just like it wouldn't necessarily tell you anything to just pick a coach out of the book and then work with them for a session and see if you like it.
No, definitely no. You want to work with somebody who has experience of having trained. So you need to interview your supervisor to be sure that the supervisor has training as a supervisor. Ideally, still have an accreditation with EMCC, the European Mentor and Coaching Council, and AC. Both of them offer accreditation to supervisors. So I would tell people, go and look in their list. And I have been a proponent and a supporter of that. Like I sponsor the first accredited supervisors in the United States, in Canada, in Argentina, in Mexico, in Brazil. So I pay for all of these people to support them to get their accreditation, because I thought that it was important that they start modeling, that they show that they are following all of the standards from the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, so they can be role model for other people to follow them. And I think that when I got my accreditation a few years ago, I was number 10th, the 10th person. So it was something new, the EMCC accreditation. And now I think there are almost 200 people in that list. So people have 200 people to choose from that list of people who have received training, have experience, follow ethical standards, and as a result of that, they have received an accreditation from the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. And AC, Association for Coaching, they also have their own credentialing process and their own credential supervisors. I don't know how many are, I'm not familiar with them and what they're doing, but there is probably, if you go, you will find at least there too. Now, having an accreditation means that they have training. That doesn't mean necessarily that you will have chemistry, but the other piece is the chemistry. So you may want to interview 2 or 3 people until you choose the one that you like better. But I would say that the main concern is being sure that the supervisor has a training. Like, for example, ICF now doesn't make it mandatory for people to get supervision, but for new people who want to become team coaches, supervision is mandatory. And the supervisor should have trained as a supervisor. So the supervisor doesn't have training, cannot function as a supervisor for people to be able to get supervision, that they need at least 5 hours to apply for the team coaching credential. So there is some standards.
Yeah. I hear you're clearly a fan of accreditation, competency models. It's an important part of the work. I wonder if there's anything you'd critique or anything that you see in the world of accreditation, in the world of competencies, in the world of professional bodies that you think might be in the way of good coaches developing, or something that isn't going well, that might need some improvement.
Well, coaching is not a profession, it's a professional practice. And it's a new professional practice, only have 20, 30 years since these associations exist. So there is a lot of progress that need to be, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Yeah, these systems are very far from perfect. They need a lot of improvement. So yes, right, in many different places. But at least that means that they're following some ethical standards. That's my concern. That you can work with somebody, you can make the person responsible because they are following ethical standards. If the person is not a member of any association and is not an ethical professional, you cannot do anything. What can you do? You cannot do anything. Anybody can call themselves coach, supervisor, mentor, whatever, and do anything. But if they don't have a credential, if they are not part of an association, you don't have any way. If the person is not doing a good job or being unethical or unprofessional, you don't have where to go professionally. Maybe legally, you maybe sue the person, but that's important. That's important for me of credentialing and getting accreditations. And the systems are not perfect; they need a lot of improvement. But at least they are in place for trying to do their best to provide some ethical standards for the professional practice.
Yeah, and as you mentioned a couple of times already, right? Just because somebody is not accredited or not credentialed doesn't necessarily mean that they're a terrible coach. It just means it's more likely that they are, fulfilling a certain level of standards. So especially if you're looking for a supervisor, it's helpful to just pick one from the list that has gone through the training and has subscribed to the ethical code, rather than somebody who isn't. It doesn't mean that somebody who isn't credentialed and part of a professional supervision body has gone through all the training. Doesn't necessarily mean they can't help you reflect on your work. It just makes it more likely, I guess, no?
Well, but the credential is like in any profession. When you work, I don't know in Germany how is it, Janik, but a lawyer, when they finish school, they need to pass an exam, don't they?
Yeah, they're not allowed to practice. Yeah.
So it's a way to do that. Getting a credential is a way to say, okay, I pass Wherever I demonstrate that I have the training, I have the hours of experience, I pass an exam. And it's true that many people may not need it because they already have a lot of clients. But for me, it's a way to, if you leave from coaching and you're a successful coach, you may say, oh, I don't need a credential. But having a credential is a way to be part of the community. It's a part of supporting the development of the professional practice. So I do believe that having a credential doesn't make you a better coach. You can have somebody who is not credentialed who can be amazing, and you can have somebody who has a credential and can be not good. So having a credential is not a guarantee of performance, or not having one is not a guarantee of how effective the person is. But the same thing with all professions. This is my personal perspective. I think to the extent that people do that, they allow for the professional practice to be more professional. So to the extent that there are more people accredited, there are more people committed to the professional practice, to grow, to contribute, it's better for everybody.
And especially at higher levels, it's part of becoming a masterful coach to contribute to the profession and to the practice. Like you said, it's a way to connect to your community. I don't think you need to necessarily be part of a professional body and an active part in it to be active in your community, to be contributing to the practice. So sometimes I'm a bit critical about institutions. For example, with that comparison with lawyers, would you prefer that coaches wouldn't be allowed to practice, that it would become a protected term and people who don't go through that kind of route better be very clearly distinguished and not maybe allow themselves to be coached?
Definitely, Yannick, because that will bring some credibility, more credibility to the profession. When you were saying that you were worried about how in Mexico coaching is seen, Mexico and Brazil, in many parts of the world, people who have not had training, who have not had ethical standard, make the professional practice of coaching look really bad. So I do believe that there will be a benefit having that. It's like in the United States, you cannot call yourself psychologist if you don't have an accreditation as a psychologist. So for me, I was a licensed clinical psychologist in Argentina. I got my Ph.D. as an organizational psychologist, but I cannot say that I am a psychologist. I cannot use that word. When I am outside the United States, I can. But in the United States, I cannot use that word because it's protected. And I think it's not good for me, but I think it's good for the practice of psychologists.
But that kind of points to my critical perspective that I have on this, because you are clearly a psychologist and you have all the training and you have the experience and you have the license in your country. So there's a body in the United States that doesn't let people in, even though they have equivalent experience and credentials. I see a problem with that kind of over-regulation of professions. Totally see your point, by the way. It does give more credibility, but I think there's a danger of over-regulating, and then there's gatekeepers, and they keep really good people out of the circles where they can actually contribute.
Well, listen, we all have a choice. So I can choose go and do the exam if I want to. So I choose not to do that because I'm not interested in being part of that community. But if I wanted to be called a psychologist, if I want to be recognized as a psychologist, what I had to do is go sit, study hours and hours, and then go do the exam and do it. And I think that with credentialing is the same. It's like you need just to fill the paperwork and maybe show that you can coach in a recording, and that's it. You know that you have to invest. Now, there are politics in the place. Sometimes they are good, sometimes they are not good. About that, about going and getting a credential. What does it mean going and getting a credential? But at the same time, some people, I know colleagues that I respect, and they are very great in what they do, and they don't want to be part of that politic, and that's their choice. It's their choice. I think we all have the opportunity to choose. But if you look at the whole, and because I was a leader, I was part of the president of the International Coach Federation for 2 years. I was in the board for 6 years. If I look what is better for everybody, I think at the end of the day, for everybody, if you look at the whole, it's better when it's regulated because there are more guarantees. It's the way that I look from a macro perspective. If you look at each case, yes, there are cases where people can fall. And I can see your point, and I agree that they can be excellent professionals, that they decide that they don't want to be engaged or involved. They don't care about having a credential. And that's okay, that's their choice. But if you look at the whole and what's better for the whole, particularly when you were talking about Latin America and some countries like in Brazil, in Mexico, coaching has bad press because of all of these people who have called themselves coaches, who are not training, who are not ethical. If they would have to have some regulations for them to call coaches that may be avoided or protected to some extent. So it's looking from another perspective. It's looking from another place.
Yeah, and I do really hear that. I guess I'm thinking about the people that just, it's really expensive to go through that kind of training. But when you look at it from a bigger picture, right, as a whole, I totally get where you're coming from. I feel for the people who want to be part of it and who've read all the books and, listened to every podcast and really put the work in. But they're just like, well, okay, now I need to find another 10 grand to $5 grand to do a coach training to have the hours to get accepted into the circle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but listen, Janik, everybody who go to any university or any place that you go to study, you have to invest in education to get the training. And there are all kind of programs, and there are programs for 10,000, 5,000, 2,000. So there are all kind of programs. So I don't believe that should be an issue. That should be, if you really want to have credibility. And listen, I don't know in Germany, but in the United States, most big organizations, they will not hire a coach if they don't have the credentials. So credentials is a requirement to get, and companies who hire coaches to work for their clients, they will not hire a client if they don't have a credential. So a credential is a way to show that you have the training and the hours, and it is not cheap, but it's not very expensive either. Like a credential is not a very expensive process compared to what, if you are successful and you have a practice, shouldn't be a big investment. I know, but I know, for example, my father, an example, he is in Argentina, and the membership for International Coach Federation is around $250, I think. And he called me and said, Damian, this is a lot of money for me here right now, like with the change in dollars. And I want to keep my credential, but I don't think I want to continue my membership. And because he knows that I'm the past president, and for him, it's he was feeling guilty. And I said, if you are not taking advantage, don't renew your credential. If you don't feel like you're really taking advantage of being a member. Now, what is good about ICF compared to EMCC is that for EMCC to have a credential, you need to be a member. But for ICF, it's not. So for ICF, you can keep a credential without being a member. So I said, if you are not taking advantage of your membership, if you're not going to activities, if it's not bringing value, just let it go, but don't let go of your credential. I would not hire him if he doesn't have a credential.
Yeah. I guess a lot of people just go by the relationship and see how it feels to be in the presence of that coach. And most clients, they don't ask about your credentials. They just figure out, does it feel right? Do I have a feeling that this person can help me? And I think that in itself
Jenny, but this is if it is a life coach. But if it is an organization, a company, companies most of the time want to know that the person is credentialed. And one of the reasons why I started doing supervision training, because a company in the United States lost a big contract because when they were interviewed by the client, they asked about supervision and they say, no, this is not as important for us supervision. We don't do that. So they lost a big contract compared to the competitor who was providing supervision. So they called me and said, Damian, we need you to train our coaches and supervisors because we cannot afford to lose our a big client again like this. Yeah. So companies, organizations are looking at credential, are looking at supervision to hire executive coaches. It's not that life coaches, but executive coaches in companies, yes.
Yeah, good. I'm on your side. I just feel that I need to represent all of the people that often tell me, that, it's like, because I know there's a lot of people out there listening to this now and they're like, oh, but I'm not, and maybe I have an issue with it, or maybe, so I think it's good to hear those challenges.
No, that's a great conversation. And I don't think necessarily I am right. I don't think that my perspective is the only one. I embrace other perspectives. And for people who are listening, I want them to understand why I'm saying what I'm saying and what I am looking for. So this is where I'm coming from.
You make a very passionate case, and I appreciate that. I also have an eye on the time. There's one thing, if you don't mind, that I wanted to ask you, which is about transformation. I ask every guest about transformation. You wrote a book in Spanish. Part of that 3-book in one is about personal transformation. So I know you have a view on this, but also transformation has been meaning so many things to so many people, and it's been used quite lightly, and it's been used in a way that kind of creates a pressure that some form of transformation has to happen. So I'm just curious about your take of, well, what is transformation? What's your framework for it? And is that a goal that coaches should aspire to?
Well, we're talking about language before. The transformation may means different things for different people. So the word transformation and what means can have different meanings. For me, and again, I'm talking about my personal perspective about it, is that transformation is about awareness and new awareness and insight and learning. So when I think about transformation, what I'm thinking is about learning, thinking about insight, and I'm thinking about awareness. And I believe that part of our job as coaches, supervisors in this field is to bring higher level of awareness to people. So we're talking before at the beginning, we started and we finished with something similar. It's about why coaching, why supervision, because it's a way to contribute, to make a different work, and how people have better relationship with themselves and others, and more effectiveness and more well-being. I believe by developing higher level of awareness. So we don't know what we don't know, what I was saying before. So we have blind spots. So coaching helps us to look at these blind spots, help us to look at places we are not seen by ourselves. So as a result of having new perspective, being a new observer of the situation, that can give us possibilities for new action. So the idea here is new awareness allows for new perspectives, for new ways of looking at the world, and these new ways of looking at things help us, support us in seeing possibilities that were not possible before. So I like, and that's possibility, like in existential work, I wonder if you use that distinction a lot or not. Do you work with possibility, with the distinction possibility? With the idea of possibility, what is possible and what is not, like in terms of existentialism.
Yeah, I mean, how can we not, as coaches in general, I think. But existentially, I mean, there's always an uncertainty around what's possible. It's so an individual question, but it's a powerful line of inquiry if you start creating a space where somebody can think about what's possible. Some people call that potential, but I think possibility is a much more beautiful term to engage somebody in what could be.
So this is, for me, transformation. It's about developing new awareness, so you have new possibilities. New possibilities bring new actions, and new possibilities bring new ways of being and doing, and you get different results.
Yeah, so once you reach a new way of being, I mean, that is the new form, right? That you transformed into.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Okay. Damian, I don't want to keep you for longer than I had asked you for. Is there a message you want to send out to coaches? I mean, you've sent many messages, but is there something you want to tell the audience, including where they might be able to hear more about you and your work? Where can they come kind of closer into your sphere?
Well, I think that thank you for the invitation. It was great, this conversation, thought-provoking. And it's good to see that there are different perspectives and they are not right or wrong. It's good to know where you're coming from. And sometimes regarding, we were talking before, if people are not getting supervision, highly recommend that you try it and decide if you like it or not. But I do believe that all coaches should be working with a supervisor to look at our blind spots. In terms of credentialing, you have been considering, and you already have the training, but you didn't get the credential for whatever reason. I do believe that getting a credential gives credibility. Maybe different in Germany or in other places where people are calling, but I do believe that by getting a credential, they give you credibility, but also support the whole professional practice, because that gives credibility for everybody, and everybody benefits from that. And in terms of keep developing and learning, this is a kind of professional practice where we need to keep learning. And so if you're listening to this podcast, means that you are interested in learning, not you would not be here. So keep doing that, keep looking for things, and interestingly also for different perspectives, not necessarily things that you like or agree. Sometimes it's good to hear things that we don't agree or we don't like, as a way to learn and see other people's positions and learning from that. I do believe that that is helpful. Sometimes there is a channel here that I don't like at all, that is very, in Los Angeles, in the United States, it's called Fox News, that is very Republican and supports Trump, and that's not follow my preference as a Democrat. But sometimes purposely I listen to this because I want to understand how they are seeing the world. Sometimes it made me sick, but I do believe it's good to see and understand and listen and hear how other people see the world, because we can learn from that too.
Yeah, I think this is where learning and growth, we are confronted with different perspectives, and we are allowed to actually consider them. It's easy to spend time in our bubbles, and I think within coaching, there's similar bubbles. I always thought it was coaching schools are too insular, and people do their training, and then they are alumni, and then they go through the same CPDs. And I think it's important we have all these different influences. So thank you so much for making time to share your perspective. It's been really, really valuable. If people want to train with you, learn more from you, where can they go to be part of your network in some way?
They can go to my website, goldvargconsultinggroup.com. I don't know if later when you edit the video, if you can add that. That's a way. My website, I have all of the programs I train, as I said before, coaches, mentor coaches, supervisors, support people to get their credential with MCC credential, that is a higher level credential. And I offer demonstrations from my programs. So my programs are all open. So I open all my programs, and we invite guests to participate. And Janik, you may come to one of the programs, even to the network that we have. The American Coach Supervision Network is once a month, it's free. Anybody can show up, it's not only for supervisors, also for coaches. And it's always the third Monday of the month. We have one yesterday. So the third Monday of the month, 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we have this free session. And in YouTube, in my YouTube channel, I have more than 350 videos with things that I have done over the years. If they want to learn more about see me in action, teaching or training or coaching or supervising, there is a lot of available there too.
It's great for my research. I really can recommend that. And nearly 9,000 subscribers at this point as well. So you've done a lot of work and you're offering a lot of value. So really appreciate how you're showing up and what you're doing for the world of coaching. Thank you for your time, for your teaching, and please keep doing what you do. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the interview. Thank you for your time too. And looking forward to keep collaborating in the future in process. Who knows what can come up.
Great. Thank you, Damian.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. To watch these episodes on video, make sure you also check out youtube.com/animascoaching. See you back here soon.